Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison Levy. I am Director of Brown University Digital Publications, and it's a pleasure to introduce our panel, a model for diversifying and expanding digital publishing, which presents lessons learned in diversifying and expanding the field of digital publishing from Brown Library's Institute, entitled Born Digital Scholarly Publishing, Resources and Roadmaps, which ran last summer and was supported by the Office of Digital Humanities at NEH. Born digital publications create exciting new conditions for the production and sharing of knowledge. Combined with open access publishing models, new scholarly forms are increasing the visibility and reach of scholarship in unprecedented ways. Yet barriers related to funding, time, community, and institutional capacity hinder inclusive publishing. Brown's NEH Institute attempts to intervene and mitigate these barriers, not only in curating curricular resources for participants, but also in forming collaborative spaces to realize a variety of projects. And let me just pull up my slides, please. Centered on inclusivity and accessibility, this first of its kind national training program equipped 15 scholars, 60% from historically Black colleges and universities, with in-depth knowledge of the digital publishing process. Designed for scholars wishing to develop digital publications, yet hindered by limited institutional resources and support, the curriculum was taught by librarians, digital humanities scholars, and editors, consolidating the successful path to university press publication formulated by Brown University Digital Publications, a program for distinction based in the university library's renowned Center for Digital Scholarship. The full curriculum, including recordings of all faculty presentations, has been made openly available and accessible via a resource-rich website that provides a continuous and active web presence for the Institute, thereby expanding the voices, perspectives, and visions represented in digital publishing far beyond the summer of 2022 cohort. This crucial reprioritization of how and for whom the practice and production of digital scholarship is taught will have a profound impact on current and future generations of scholars. Reflecting on the Institute's broader impact, both in diversifying the field of library publishing and expanding resources for producing digital publications, members from the facilitating team and cohort participants, all early career professionals and first-time presenters at LPF, will speak to how they are implementing lessons learned from the Institute at their own institutions. Our hope is that today's audience will see the Institute as a replicable model for developing, executing, and sustaining similar training opportunities at their own libraries. You'll hear directly and candidly from two of the facilitators, as well as two cohort members. We look forward to the Q&A and to discussing together additional steps that can be taken to ensure an inclusive landscape as the field of digital publishing continues to grow. And so I'm going to introduce my fellow panelists and then hand it over to them. We want to leave plenty of time for discussion. So the first speaker will be Cosette Bruhns Alonso, who is Contemporary Publishing Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries and Penn Press. Cosette was also our inaugural Diversity in Digital Publications postdoc, 2021 to 22. Next, we will hear from Warren Harding, who is our current Diversity and Digital Publishing postdoc in the library. His next stop is SUNY Binghamton, where he will take up a tenure track position in the English department in just another month. Ashley Robertson Preston is Assistant Professor of History at Howard University and a member of the 22 cohort. And Emily Lynell Edwards, another cohort member, is Assistant Professor of Digital Humanities and Educational Technologist at St. Francis College. And so I'm pleased to hand things over to Cosette.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me all right? Great. Okay. Thank you to the Library Publishing Coalition for facilitating this panel and creating space for discussing strategies, challenges, and considerations for developing multimodal digital publications that will continue to grow and expand this community. I'm also a member of the LPC's DEI committee and want to acknowledge the work and thank all of the different committees involved in organizing this, this conference. And it's wonderful to see some of you in attendance as well, many of you. I'm delighted to be a part of this roundtable, and I'm very grateful to be in dialogue on this topic with this really wonderful group of scholars and colleagues and authors who I also consider friends. I especially want to extend a sincere thank you to Allison, Levy for the invitation to participate and for continued mentorship in the field. I was fortunate to learn from and work alongside Allison and the team at Brown University Digital Publications as the inaugural Diversity in Digital Publishing postdoctoral research associate. This unique opportunity united many of my seemingly disparate interests in material and visual cultures, digital scholarship, and academic publishing, and was incredibly formative and essential to the work I'm doing now, establishing a digital publishing program at Penn. And also want to say hello and thank Crystal Brush, Holiday Shapiro, Matt Carley, and Morgan Harding, who formed the library team during the Institute. It was a gift to learn through their expertise and to work so collaboratively throughout the Institute. And I will begin to talk about the Institute at this point, but I think it just kind of speaks to the really wonderful collaboration that united this Institute. So in the time allotted to me, I want to outline a few key takeaways from the Institute design and experience that I think made it a unique and successful introduction to digital publishing, especially to born digital and multimodal digital publishing, in ways that continue to underpin work that I'm thinking about and actively working in at Penn. The first area I'd like to outline is the approach to the Institute is introducing a digital publishing landscape or roadmap with all of the respective potential detours, considerations, and guidelines. In the course of the postdoctoral position, I knew it would be challenging to oversee a project from start to completion. They can take several years to develop. However, I really appreciated that the range of publications in the portfolio at Brown Library at all different stages of development made it possible to deeply consider a wide range of paths and considerations for digital publications development. And I see this as a really key asset that I can now speak to this range of considerations from a digital publication proposal to design, to development, content ingestion, project management, preservation, discoverability, peer review, and even marketing, and have this broad picture to draw on and apply to new projects. And so although the Institute was designed to last 3 weeks, my perspective is that the cohort was similarly introduced to a cohesive range of considerations for a digital publication in all of these stages. And my sense is that coming away with that broad perspective and knowledge has likewise been generative for thinking about digital publication projects in research and teaching and beyond at each cohort member's institution. So that's not to say that there was a lack of conversation around specific platforms or skills. Those topics were certainly covered as well. But I think that the approach to showing how the different platforms or technologies could be situated within the digital publishing landscape broadly and understanding how they could support a narrative argument was a really essential takeaway from this experience that extended from the design of the postdoc to the design of the Institute. I would add that this thinking also guided the development of the Institute website as a publication itself. that could continue to exist as a resource for the cohort to return to, or for others to turn to in order to get a sense of the digital publishing landscape. And I think that the design of the Institute as 2 weeks of presentations, often offering theory and practice through positioning an editor or a designer or developer in dialogue with an author, provided a really well-rounded picture of each platform, topic, or consideration, and was a particularly successful model given the opportunity for the cohort to then come together and apply what they had learned through discussions for their own publications and development in the third week, which was held in person and all together, and truly focused on the cohort members and projects. It was truly a delight to see how many different modalities and types of projects represented by this first cohort. And yet there was a lot of synergy and overlap throughout the conversation. So I'd like to highlight another takeaway for me in particular, which throughout this experience, the postdoc and the Institute, which is, for me, I found that digital publications that are innovative and transformative, even without major technology, was I think a really important area to learn more about. So I'm really excited about the technological innovations that can advance scholarship through unique nonlinear infrastructures or interactive features. However, something I think the Institute really highlighted for me was the unique ways in which digital publications can expand the boundaries of what scholarship can look like through perhaps simpler technologies, or simply because they are multimodal and perhaps the narrative is sound driven, or because the placement of the images and videos that can break up a text, or because of the ways in which they encourage interdisciplinarity or reader participation. I was particularly struck by iterative publications as a scholarship path. And the idea of using an open access digital scholarship platform to make publications more transparent while they are in progress, rather than inviting dialogue post-publication. I think this creates space for asking really compelling questions about accessing scholarship and sharing scholarship, and what or who is being represented in the scholarship, especially when the reception can be global. In my work at Penn, I'm seeking to continue to expand this question of how to transform scholarship through design and distribution and access, especially how to ensure that digital publications are accessible across a wide range of devices and for diverse audiences. This work continues to be inspired from my experience first as a postdoc and then through the Institute at Brown. And as I come up on a year at Penn, the conversations I'm having with students, scholars, and library colleagues continues to confirm the growing motivation and interest and need for pathways to publish multimodal digital publications. So again, I feel I'm very grateful to feel set up to, well-positioned rather, to participate in this conversation and support the development of digital publishing publications at my institution. And I think I'm coming up on my time, but maybe I'll show one project really quickly in development that I'm really excited about. So I have a wireframe prototype. So forgive any non-clickable links, but let me share my screen so I can do that. Okay, there we go. So this is Prima, or Pedagogical Repository for Italian Media Activities. And so this project is conceived of as an open educational resource. The authors are a faculty member and a former graduate student in the Italian department at Penn. And there's a couple of different ideas at the heart of this project, but one of which is to reimagine what the textbook can look like and how students can engage kind of non-linearly and also by their own design with course materials, but also and importantly to diversify and present more authentic representations of contemporary life and culture in Italy and bring that into the classroom. Again, this is a prototype, but essentially there will be a little bit about the project. Scroll through. There'll be an opportunity to contribute. If you have other clips you'd like to contribute. The idea is that that this is designed both for instructors of Italian language, but also for students at Penn courses or even beyond. It will be open and be open access. It will also be fully bilingual. So there will be an opportunity to click through and find materials both in English and in Italian. And it's also searchable by type. So again, it's in development, but it just received a grant, which is being announced tomorrow, that I'm really excited about. I will end sharing there, but yeah, there's a peek at like some of the ways I'm thinking about. It's also, I should have mentioned, a static site generated and founded on kind of minimal computing principles there. So ways in which I'm carrying forward many of the lessons learned through my experience at Brown. Thank you.
Thank you, Cosette, and congratulations on that grant for Prima, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Warren Harding, and I'm the current Diversity and Digital Publishing postdoctoral research associate at Brown University Digital Publications, and I just thank the Library Publishing Forum for this opportunity for all of us to reconnect again. We've been reconnecting over this year following the Institute and everything. So it's always a delight to share space. And I wanted to just continue to share some insights, in staffing the NEH funded Born Digital Scholarly Publishing Resources and Roadmaps Institute from this past summer. And that the programming, to affirm that the programming and resources generated from this institute offers opportunities to increase diversity in digital publishing, especially as it attended to the needs of diverse authors, subjects, and editors in order to maximize the depth and breadth of digital scholarly publishing. As Allison mentioned, Brown hosted this 3-week cohort of scholars, faculty, librarians, and technologists in a hybrid format. The cohort comprised of 15 scholars representing a range of institutions, 60% coming from HBCUs, as well as liberal arts colleges and state universities. There was a variety of disciplines, including literature, history, philanthropy, far-right philanthropy, data science, theater arts, and digital media studies, as well as a range of topics, including Black women's philanthropy, far-right politics on social media, indigeneity and climate justice, the connection between life insurance and the legacy of slavery, data pollution, and radio recordings of African writers. The Institute maximized a cohort model in order to form, cultivate, and expand a community of scholars and networks undertaking Born Digital monographs. So during our 3rd week in-person convening, where the cohort were at Brown, we took this photo in front of the Van Wickle gates at Brown. And I just always love showing this photo because it just, again, represents that sense of community and cohort modeling that we wanted to cultivate as part of the Institute. The Institute focused on authors in recognizing that all too often they are left on their own, especially having the burden of gathering assets, seeking funding, and crafting their narratives while completing teaching and service responsibilities at their institutions. Of course, we know that these are some hurdles for completing long-form, narrative-driven digital publishing. And we hope to bridge that gap, especially as disciplinary organizations, university presses, and nonprofit organizations have been and remained excited about what the digital space can do for the circulation of knowledge. Notwithstanding the Institute leveraged resources to ensure a more equitable field in digital publishing, especially as most of the digital publishing activity comes from well-resourced, predominantly white institutions, which presents some barriers for scholars of color and or projects that center underrepresented voices, be it around race, citizenship, sexuality, gender, class, to be fully supported. So this was the first project that I jumped into as a postdoc, and it was such a rewarding experience to not only participate in the workshops and presentations, but to also hear from the brilliance of cohort members and faculty in discussing their projects and how they can envision tools for digital publishing, enhancing their arguments in circulation and circulation to a wide array of audiences. So I give a big shout out to Allison, Cosette, as well as Crystal Bruce, who is a designer in BUDP, and Holiday, who is our technologist, as well as Matt Carley, who was a graduate student proctor in the classics department at Brown, who coordinated most of the pre-institute activities. As I joined, my roles included listening in, becoming familiar with the landscape of digital publishing, something Cosette mentioned as a takeaway from having this institute. This landscape of digital publishing was really important, as well as supporting the development of a resource list for the website and facilitating 2 check-ins during the academic year. Cohort members during the Institute had the opportunity in our first 2 weeks of the Institute, which was all virtual, to hear from a range of workshops that helped them to think about narrative, project management tools, platform engagement, design, preservation, copyright and fair use, and be introduced to a roundtable of university publishing press editors to discuss pitches and proposals. During our in-person component, cohort members offered presentations on their projects and received feedback from other cohort members as well as experts here at Brown in order to think about possibilities on moving forward. In addition, we coordinated various informal meet and greets with Brown staff and faculty and walks to places around Brown and in Providence. And so here's some other photos from that experience, again, during that 3rd week. On the left, we have our cohort members in front of the Rockefeller Library, on the steps of the Rockefeller Library, and on the right, we have a photo of our cohort members at the landing in downtown Providence over the Providence River. Again, we wanted to cultivate that cohort immersion, yes, within the day-to-day discussions around projects, but also in gathering together in order to build community. So we received both anonymous and non-anonymous feedback from cohort members. So I wanted to share one of our cohort members' feedback. This is from Tyrone McKinley Freeman, who's an associate professor of philanthropy studies at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at IUPUI. And he said, the Institute gave me new colleagues, new insights, and new and excitement for the digital humanities and digital publishing. Now I have a comprehensive orientation towards digital publishing that has reshaped my approach to my project. And I have new friends at Brown and from my cohort as traveling companions on this journey. Whether you are in the early exploratory phase of your project, as I am, or have a completed manuscript, or any place in between, the Institute has something incredibly valuable and special for you. And this reiterates and affirms what Cosette presented in her reflection about the Institute being a ground and a landing board for scholars who are in the process of doing digital publishing from different stages. That it didn't matter whether this was a new project or a project that was just conceived. The importance of the Institute was to gather again that level of expertise from a range in order for folks to fit in and learn and grow together. So another part of the experience, the post-Institute experience, was again collating anonymous feedback from faculty, from our cohort. And one of the things I noticed from the feedback that there was great enthusiasm for recommending the Institute to colleagues. And yet there were also some ideas for further expansions in sessions, including but not limited to asset management, navigating the peer review process for digital publications, and developing peer-to-peer mentorship between those who have published digital publications and those who are still going through the process. We learned that all cohort members needed support in securing time to devote to research and writing, especially at more teaching intensive and administrative intensive institutions. And this would help scholars to seek additional funding to craft their narratives, build relationships with editors, and ultimately scope and rescope their projects. As we mentioned, there was a website that was published, which has all of the resources from the Institute, including a course outline, recommended readings, faculty presentations. And I just wanted to take us into the recommended readings here, which included the various topics for the workshops. But I wanted to go to the bottom where, following the Institute, I generated a list of resources, reference resources throughout the Institute for anyone who's interested in digital publishing. And again, we just had such a wealth of knowledge around, again, our cohort members and faculty that would just drop things in different sessions. So I organized these resources around digital projects, which included DH projects, archives, repositories, data-driven projects, digital publications, which were included peer-reviewed, long-form monographic, interpretive narrative, essays, reports, blogs, digital tools and methodologies, funding opportunities, and platforms. Because again, we wanted to make sure that all of this knowledge was available for the wider public. And we've had approximately 3,000 unique users visit the site since it launched in January of 2022, representing 22 countries. Again, this knowledge extended beyond the 15 cohort members and the 3 weeks here at Brown. So following the Institute, we coordinated 2 virtual check-ins for the academic year to continue that sense of community. And during these check-ins, cohort members not only shared updates on the progress of their publications, but also we also shared updates on what was happening in Brown University digital publications, as well as any news in the digital publishing world. And knowing that our cohort members had busy schedules, especially again with high teaching and administrative duties, as well as 2 of our cohort members were changing institutions, we allowed for flexibility in several ways. First, we coordinated 4 sessions during our October check-in, and if cohort members were not scheduled to provide an update, they were not expected to attend. Still, we saw many cohort members attend even when they were not providing updates in order to support their cohort mates. As well, we heard that cohort members were, collaborating on different panels at different associations they were involved in. And so far, 2 of our cohort members have been reached out to by university presses, one of whom has been asked to submit sample chapters, and 1 cohort member is under contract with an independent academic press. And one of the things that we also gathered from these check-ins and in moving forward is the need to think about those narrative approaches, allowing for space for authors to craft their narrative, and also the ability for authors to approach and feel comfortable in approaching university presses as early as possible in their projects. And so, I think that those two points were important because, when beginning a digital publishing project, the idea around where can you get support is always an issue, is always, forefront. But to know that, that there is support especially in reaching out to publishing editors from the early stages, was important to move through the fear of, what platform would I choose? Let the press work with you to think about that and what is available infrastructurally at the press, right? So these are some of the insights that I've gathered, from the NEH Institute, and I really recommend, anyone to go onto the website to again interact and interface with all the resources that that have been placed for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. I think Ashley is next.
Thank you all so much for this platform. Thank you to my colleagues for just sharing this information. And I will say that I gained a lot from the Institute. I want to talk a little bit about my project really briefly, and then I'll talk about some of my takeaways. First, let me say that the hybrid format of the Institute, having 2 weeks virtual and 1 week in person, I thought that was just phenomenal. I think it's a great template for other organizations because I noticed that even with the people who were sitting around the table, we had folks who were super busy. We had folks who had children, it just allowed more people to be able to come rather than having to worry about taking 3 weeks away from, everything that you have going on. And they were really flexible with all of us. So I have nothing bad to say about the Institute. I've really been telling more people about it in hopes that they will take notice of the great work that you all are doing. So my digital project is a continuation of the research that I have been doing for the last 13 years on Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, an educator and internationally known leader. I'm really excited about making more people aware of her work. And I think that a digital project will really be essential to sharing this knowledge. My journey with Mrs. Bethune, as I said, goes back 13 years. I worked at her home in DC, which is a part of the National Park Service. Thereafter, I worked at her university and her home in Daytona Beach, Florida for 5 years. And I have published 2 books on Mrs. Bethune. The latest is Mary McLeod Bethune, the Pan-Africanist, which is being released next week. And so when I did the book, Mary McLeod Bethune in Florida, I actually interviewed 4 people who knew Mrs. Bethune personally. Her last living secretary, Miss Senorita Locklear, her grandson, who has since passed away, one of her mentees, who has since passed away, Dr. Cleo Higgins, and Mr. Harold Lucas, who is in this picture. He's actually going to be 92 years old this year. And so in the book, I only included some of the snippets of those interviews, but I wanted to share those interviews with this digital project to be able to bring those interviews to life and allow others to hear them and possibly use them in their work if they would like to. So this is one aspect of the project. The different essays that I have been starting to craft, looking at the beginning of Bethune-Cookman University, a historically Black college in Daytona Beach, Florida, that Mrs. Bethune started. Also looking at her work with the National Council of Negro Women and the National Association of Colored Women, her work with World War II and the Roosevelt administration primarily, and her work as a world leader, and lastly, continuing the legacy. As you'll note, as you go to these different archives, there's so much material. I mean, it's almost kind of buried in these archives. And so I would like to bring some of those documents out. This is just one of the letters of many that I would like to include on this in this digital project. Mrs. Bethune was very much a writer. And so we have a lot of her writings that are not only in archives, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, but also for the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. She was a columnist for several years for those 2 major Black newspapers, and I would like to include some of that. I think these writings give us a lot of information about who she was, what her thoughts were on some of the things that were going on at the time. She talks about world events, national events, women's rights, civil rights. I mean, so many different topics that she is discussing within these writings. And I would like to pull those out and bring those to life with this project. And my apologies for going back and forth. I would also like to include the Afro-American Women's Journal. This was the journal of the National Council of Negro Women, an organization that Mrs. Bethune started in 1935. And so the National Archives for Black Women's History has different documents, Afro-American Journal being one of them. It has not really been written about a lot. And so this is something that I would also like to include, and they're in really, really good shape. Those journals are. Lastly, I'm working on a project in which I would like to map some of the places that she visited. When we think about the work of Mrs. Bethune, most folks talk about her being an educator, starting her school in Daytona, or either being in Washington, D.C., where she started National Council of Negro Women. But she also traveled extensively to Cuba. She traveled to Haiti. She traveled to Liberia. She was known around the world. And this is a new aspect of her life that I'm including in this book, but I will also include in this digital project to situate her into this international narrative because she was known by many throughout the world. Lastly, my hope is really to include some of the recent events relating to Mrs. Bethune's legacy, such as her statue that is in Statuary Hall now. She is the first African-American to represent a state in Statuary Hall. And that's really significant. It's significant not only for Florida, but for the nation and the Capitol. When we look at all of those people who are in the Capitol, who are represented, you have Mrs. Bethune standing tall as the first African-American woman to represent a state. So this is something that will be included in this project. So some of my takeaways from this, I have really began to try to implement into my coursework more understanding of digital publications. Prior to this institute, I knew very little about digital publications. I remember applying and thinking, how am I going to navigate this? Because I don't really know what I'm doing here. I have an idea, but I don't really know how to bring it to life. And that's what the Institute helped me to understand, how to bring it to life. And that's what I'm bringing into my classes. In the fall, for my readings in public history course for my graduate students, we examined digital publications as part of the coursework. And I also challenged them to begin to think about ways in which they would like to publish digitally. You know, will it be an article? Will it be a book? But really introducing graduate students to this concept. As someone stated earlier, we were talking about the presentations. I also was able to present on my participation with the Toward Radical Imagination Conference, which was hosted by the Digital Library Federation at CLEAR, along with some of my other HBCU colleagues. And that was a really good opportunity to just make other people aware of the participation, the availability of this institute, and just some of the things that we learned. I've also been reaching out to the library and trying to implement more of what they have to offer within my classes. As a historian, I think that sometimes we are kind of behind the loop a bit when it comes to these digital projects. And I'm really trying to not try to learn all this information myself, but to lean in on the library to kind of bridge the gap and to try to collaborate more. And lastly, some takeaways. I was able to connect with other scholars who were doing this type of work. I was introduced to those various platforms. Again, I was not very knowledgeable on those platforms before, but now I at least can have a conversation. You know, I understand some of the differences, and I've been thinking about what platforms I would like to use for my project. And the last thing I would just like to say is that I just learned a lot from not only Brown and the scholars there, but also just everyone who was a part of the Institute. It was very much a model, I think, for other institutions. And I love that there was this major inclusion of historically Black colleges and universities. So when we talk about, you know, some of those partnerships, you know, this is very ideal. You had the schools that were coming in. We've had continued relationships even beyond the Institute. You know, it's not like we went back to our home base and, you know, it's just like, okay, go do what you need to do now. You know, we have been continuing these conversations, continuing to stay in contact. And those check-ins, I would say, have really helped me. I haven't gotten as far in my project as I want to because I had another book that I was working on in the moment, but it's still in the forefront. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ashley.
All right, I guess I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this is working. Get started. Then everyone can see that, I'm assuming. Yes, perfect. Well, thank you so much. Oh, is my screen sharing paused, or can everyone see the screen? Ooh. Hopefully it's good.
It's tilted to the side a little bit.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's bizarre. Is that better?
That's perfect.
Perfect. All right, we won't go full screen. No one needs that. So thank you so much, Allison, and my cohort colleagues and the folks over at Brown. It is a pleasure to be with you all today. Very excited to be part of this conference. So I'm an assistant professor of digital humanities and educational technologist at St. Francis College, and I'll just go ahead and kind of jump right in, leave some time for questions. So this is a little bit about the project that brought me to the Institute. This is now excited to share my pretty cover of my book project entitled Digital Islamophobia, Tracking a Far-Right Crisis. And this is just a little bit of an abstract of the project. I was really, really interested in taking my project, which looks at far-right politics on social media and uses data analytic and digital methods, and turning that into a digital publication. It felt like a very sort of natural progression of my book project to make this project something more than just a static sort of written text. And so that was what sort of connected me to the Institute initially. However, I'm a first-time author, sort of early career researcher, and so I didn't really have a lot of institutional support or even knowledge about how to go about this process for publishing your first book in this way. And so that's a little bit about my project and how I got kind of keyed in there. I will say I had some unique considerations that have even crystallized since participating in the Institute. And these are sort of connected again to the methods that I use to produce my research, which really focuses on data scraping, doing feminist data analytic analysis, and then visualizing the data that I'm working with. So for my book project, I was really thinking through how can I make my data visualizations more interactive and engaging for readers who aren't just readers, but sort of viewers and users of a project like this. How could a digital publication allow me to play around with embedding sample data sets to make this type of data accessible again to reader users so that they could replicate or remix my work? And how could I annotate some of these sort of multimedia assets that I have so that reader users, viewers could become sort of involved in the process? And so these were some considerations that I had as I was kind of, formulating this project. And it was really, really helpful to see sort of authors and editors in conversation talking through some of these considerations that were slightly different from mine, but to get a sense of how do these conversations even unfold with your publisher. And so I have to say that, the curation of different types of, experts coming in from editors, publishers, authors who've gone through the process themselves were absolutely critical for me as a first-time author to kind of get a sense of the language that I should be using when I sort of went with my own sort of conversations with my publisher, De Gruyter. But I want to pause on that for a minute because another reason I was really, really interested in joining the Institute was as an educational technologist at my college, was getting trained to have the knowledge and skills and expertise that I needed to then support faculty and students who wanted to do digital publishing themselves. St. Francis College is a Hispanic serving institution. We have a very diverse student body with a strong first generation population. And I was really, really interested in getting a sense of the landscape of digital publishing and how I could take back some of these resources and take back this expertise and then empower students and faculty to engage with digital publishing technologies and approaches to produce their own work. And I really, really felt like this was absolutely central, this sharing out of resources and making these things accessible so that even if you're not physically a member of, the Institute as a cohort member, that this curation of resources is kind of a ready to go set of information to take digital publishing and bring it to your institution. And so if I could talk all about how helpful it was to think about design and content, asset management, platform consideration, project planning, all of these different facets of not just writing a book, but making a digital publication that we went over in these different sessions. But fundamentally, this came down to understanding the language around needs and wants and scaling and rescaling. And so again, as a first-time author, having not been familiar with the traditional publishing process, even much less the digital publishing process, the Institute was absolutely central for me to rethink. There's all these things I could do with my project, but what do I really need to make this successful for me? What do I need versus what do I want? And so scaling and rescaling, this was really helpful. And I also felt very empowered to, think through some of these decisions and say, okay, maybe I'm not going to go with the most high tech, most complicated, sophisticated, sort of options out there. But what are the things I can do in a low tech way to make this project successful for me? So that was absolutely very, very helpful. And in terms of going forward and thinking through sort of where I'm at with my project and where my institution is, I'm working with my project manager on my need to haves to get those ready. I'm supposed to turn over the full manuscript to her at the end of the month. Fingers crossed, if I can finish that up. I will send it her way, and then we'll start having a conversation with 67 Bricks, which is the technology partner with De Gruyter, to kind of work with them and talk with them about my, my needs with my data visualizations, these sort of annotations. And DeGruyter is also embracing a digital first model. So working with them, I feel much more empowered to have these conversations, which has been helpful. But I've been super excited though, thanks to a big NEH grant. So shout out to the NEH again, that my institution has been able to invest in Manifold, which is one of the platforms we explored at the Institute. And so I've been providing a lot of support for faculty and student produced publications. And so with the time I have left, I just want to share one that I've been like super excited about. This is our SSC Manifold page. It looks very pretty. And we have recently published this project with Dr. Martina Carrolls with her Memory, Culture, and Communication class. This is a student faculty collaborative publication where students created poems that used sort of data from this ecofeminist archive that's been so beautiful. And so I worked with them kind of as the technical support to kind of help them make their project successful from conceptualization to actualization in the course of a semester. And so you can see here, students sort of took archival information and then created poems with this beautiful formatting, and then have citations here. There's more. I think some students even did 2 poems, and so these students and this faculty member were able to produce a really, really beautiful, creative archival digital publication using Manifold. And because of the expertise that I gained at the Institute, I was able, as that faculty member at SSC, to help them through the process. And so I think that empowering students to produce digital publications, that's an avenue that I'm really, really excited about. And I think that Brown's template really allows faculty members to gain the expertise they need to then go back and share that out with their colleagues and with their students. And then, yeah, I think that is all I have. If you'd like to visit, this is our Manifold instance URL, and then the QR code there's to my website, and then my Twitter handle as well. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing, but thank you all. And I'm looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks, everyone. It's just wonderful to be together again and relive all the great moments of the Institute, and especially though to hear the impact that it's having at your own institutions. It's just wonderful to hear. So we do still have some time for questions. We'd like to open it up to the audience. Okay, let's see.